Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum. And today we are tucked away right beside the Weeping Walk, right by a rather large Ilex Mary Nell, because as you can see, it is an incredibly fructiferous specimen at this time of year. And today we have our director, Mark Weathington, who is going to be giving us a talk about berries for birds. So all sorts of shrubs and trees and all sorts of other things that hold onto their fruits through the winter to entice the birds to come and feast upon what you have growing in your garden. So it will be a wonderful program. Alrighty, and with the announcements out of the way, I think we can pass things over to Mark so he can tell us about some berries for birds.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I feel like it's been a while since I've been on Midweek, and I miss it. Everybody, yeah, we're going to talk about some berries for birds. I really had to struggle going through the garden picking things because we have so many plants that are great for birds. A lot of things with seed and that sort of thing. And I kept saying, no, we're talking berries. I won't expand too far beyond that. So please, as we're going along, put any questions in the chat. Blake will answer some of those. Others I'll answer towards the end, or if he breaks in, if he thinks it's appropriate for me to answer right then, I will. Or you can wait to the end and ask us questions. So here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum, Central North Carolina, we're going to be different than if you're in some other areas of the country. But what I'm going to talk about, many of the plants will grow across much of the country. So you don't need to worry about that. Start with really one of the very, very best plants you can have, one of the very best groups of plants you can have for berries. And those are hollies. There are all kinds of different types of hollies, and as far as I can tell, they are all great for birds. This is a form of Ilex opaca, our native American holly, that it's kind of a funky form in that the leaves curl up. We call this rollover. The current director of the U.S. National Arboretum, Richard Olson, found this when he was a student and was working here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. This is a great plant, Ilex opaca, or American holly. This is the holly you see all through the woods along the East Coast. There are southern forms, there are northern forms, but they tend to really fruit heavily. Now, the one thing you have to remember with hollies is that they are, for the most part, dioecious, which means they have separate male flowering forms and separate female flowering forms. Nothing's that cut and dry in biology, especially with plants. There are some self-fertile hollies. Occasionally, one that's never fruited and always had male flowers will have a year with female flowers. And you can go through and look at literature on you get this male to pollinate this female. But I'll tell you what, if you plant a bunch of different hollies in your garden, some of them are bound to pollinate others. And if you live kind of near woodland areas, there's often plenty of native ones that can help with the pollination. So American holly is great. There is a hybrid holly. It's a natural hybrid in the Southeast called Ilex attenuata. And some of our most popular landscape hollies come out of that. Foster's holly is one. It's got a narrower leaf, very pyramidal, narrow, upright habit. And I'm told, I don't have the research behind this, I was told by a wonderful garden designer, landscape architect, that Foster holly has one of the best berries for birds, in that they're the attenuata types tend to be very high in fats, maybe, I don't know, but that whatever's in them, they're good for the birds to bulk up for the winter. So, first one, American holly. There are a lot of hybrids that are out there in the marketplace. This is one called Christmas Jewel that really fruits very heavily, very dark fruits. And you'll see as you go through hollies, there are species with red. There are ones with more orange. There are some selections with yellow, and they can range from being really glossy, dark red to being very matte colored, and they can be different sizes as well. The Christmas jewel holly is kind of has a little bit of, not quite as spiny as the American holly or some of the Chinese holly, Ilex cornuta, and smaller leaves, but it fruits really well. And it's one that tends to fruit really well even by itself without a male nearby. This one, it's still ripening. It's still got some green in there, but it'll get to be a really bright, true red, which is one of the things that makes it really nice. It's not quite there yet, but it's a fairly glossy red color on there. Love this plant, Christmas jewel. It's got a cultivar name that's some nonsense name, but you'll find it in the
Yeah, I looked it up. It's HL10-90.
You don't go to your local garden center and ask for HL10-90. They will have no idea what you're talking about. And the berries are what the birds like. This is a hybrid holly called Ilex Sadie Scudder. Don't quite know who Sadie Scudder was, but it's named for her. And you can see this is a variegated holly. The birds don't care whether it's variegated or not variegated. They just love those seeds. This isn't as heavy a fruiting one as others, but I just wanted to point out that we have some gold leaf ones that fruit really heavily, that the birds love. We have these variegated ones, and the birds just simply don't care whether the leaves are variegated or not. We do have some yellow fruited hollies, and I always find it interesting that as most of the hollies are turning red, most of the yellow fruited ones are still green. They'll turn yellow, but I didn't bring any of those just because they're not showing color yet. The birds will eat those, the birds love those, but they don't see them as well. So they tend to eat all the red ones first, and then the yellow ones come second. Now, Sadie Scudder and some of the other hollies can be kind of spiny things, and I am not into S&M gardening. I'm not a big cactus person. I'm not a big agave person. I'm not a big spiny holly person. I like these hollies with entire leaves that are not that you can get in and work with without them being spiny. This is a hybrid from the U.S. National Arboretum. This is one called Cherry Bomb. And it has large fruits and a ton of them. And you can see it's got these entire leaves, no spines at all. I love this plant. I wish more people would grow it. I've distributed it, given it to nurserymen before. It's fantastic. There's another one with a kind of a wider, thinner leaf that's a very good self-fruiting one. This is pretty good self-fruiting, but not great, called Cherry Ice as well. And that's just starting to get into the market, but really, really good plants. And there are quite a few of these entire leaved hollies. They tend to be not quite as cold hardy as many of the spiny ones. And so they haven't made it into the market because, growers want something that they can sell, north to south often. But there are some great forms without the spiny edges, species that we're playing with more and more and hoping that they'll prove to be hardier than we thought. So, Cherry Bomb, and this is like the other ones I've talked about, is an upright shrub. Our Native American holly can get quite large over time. The one I showed, Rollover, tends to be a little bit slower, but it'll go up pretty well. Christmas Jewel is 12 to 15 feet in 15 or 20 years. Cherry Bomb, I think, is ultimately, if you give it 20 years, it's probably going to get up in the 20 to 25 foot range.
We got Marilyn here asking if Cherry Bomb is completely hardy here in 7B.
Yes, cherry bomb is completely hardy in 7B. It was one of the ice and bice hybrids from up to the National Arboretum, and these were released after they got a couple of really bad cold spells that knocked out a lot of their plants. That's also some of the cold hardy camellias came out of after that that cold spell. So yeah.
And Paul also wanted to know, what's the name of a pollinator for cherry bomb?
The name of a pollinator, I assume a
plant.
A male
Yeah.
plant. So my experience with cherry bomb, it's often difficult for us here and for other people at other botanic gardens because we tend to have so many hollies that it's hard to tell what's pollinating what. Certainly, one of the parents of this we know is Ilex integra, another entire leafed holly. That's the more tender parent that can serve as a parent. But I think if you have a variety of hollies, you're probably going to be fine. But I don't know that I could tell you for sure which ones definitely do this. Cherry bomb is touted as being a fairly good self-fruiting form. Not as good as cherry ice, but still a very good one. But I grow it at home and it fruits, but I have a lot of hollies at home too. And I grow it here and it fruits. I have a lot of hollies here. It fruits at the National Arboretum. They got a lot of hollies there. It gets tricky. I think perhaps the most underused of hollies for fruiting, and really probably my favorite species for a holly in fruit, is our native Yaupon holly, Ilex vomitoria. And there are a lot of forms of it. They can be hard to find. What you generally find in the trade are some of the dwarf ones like Stokes dwarf or Bordeaux or some of those shillings. And those are all males. So, they don't fruit. But there are so many great ones. One of those yellow fruiting hollies I wanted to talk about was one called Yawkey, that is simply to me one of the most stunning fruiting shrubs anywhere. But while it's loaded with fruit, they're all green still. They haven't turned yellow. This is one of the Oscar Gray selections. He was a nurseryman who selected a bunch of hollies, Yaupon hollies. We've really gotten excited about these as ornamental and fruiting plants, in part because a nurseryman down in the coastal area, Wilmington area, said he really wished there were more Yaupon hollies available because they're salt tolerant. They'll take some salt inundation and salt spray. They salt spray really well. So we've been starting to collect more and more of these. We've already had a great collection, including ones that flush out with gold, a large one that's called Gold Tip, which if you're going to shear a plant, that's the plant to shear because the bigger it gets, the less flush you have of gold. So if you're somebody who wants to shear a plant, that's great because it'll keep it looking great. These Yaupon hollies range from, the leaf size can be almost 2 inches to really less than half an inch. They can be a somewhat glossy dark green to almost a gray. There's, in fact, before I learned about Oscar Gray as a breeder, I had a couple of plants, Gray's Little Leaf and Gray's Dwarf, and I thought those were both named because they had these very gray leaves. I didn't know why it was grays, as in possessive, but I thought it was because of the leaf color. So we're really looking at these. The Yaupon hollies, it's Ilex vomitoria. It got that name because some early Europeans who saw it growing here and talked to the tribes growing it said that it'll make you throw up if you eat the berries. It would take a ton of berries to make you throw up. It's really not a very effective emetic that way, but it does contain caffeine. So a tea made from the leaves, it does contain caffeine, like yerba mate, which is another holly from South America. But just really cool plants. And there are ones, this is a fairly small fruited ones. There's one called Dodd's Cranberry that we grow that has fruit that are maybe 3 times the size of this. Just grow a whole bunch of them, and they're amazing. And they tend to be, in my mind, very, very good fruiters year after year after year. Not all hollies are like that. Now, there are also deciduous hollies that lose their leaves. We think of hollies as evergreen, but we have some great native hollies that are deciduous. And there are ones from other countries that are deciduous as well, but we've got Ilex verticillata and others. They're often called sparkleberry and farkleberry and other things. This is one of the deciduous ones. This is one of the nice things about them. While the evergreen plants are great to have a nice evergreen presence, and if you live somewhere cold, the American holly is really one of the more cold tolerant broadleaf evergreens you can grow. But what's nice about these is they drop their leaves, and so you're left with just this beautiful shrub covered with fruit. These can be a little bit pickier in terms of needing specific pollinators, and there are some you can go online and find some great calendars that show, for these females, use this male because it's early flowering. For these females, use this male. Some of the males are Jim Dandy, is it Sprite, Little Sprite? I'm drawing a blank on them. There's Little Goblin Guy. That's one that came out of NC State. There's some dwarf ones, Little Goblin Red, Little Goblin Orange, Little Goblin Guy. I've got those planted all together. They do great. And I once grew a whole collection of our native deciduous hollies all together in a big bed. There was all different ones all together, males, females, and people would say, well, what's the best fruiting one? And I could go out there, and one year it is definitely this one. It is definitely this. It's winter red. Ilex verticillata winter red. And then the next year I'd go out and it would be something different. And then the next year it'd be something different. And then the next year maybe it's winter red. And part of what that is often plants will fruit heavy one year, flower and fruit, and then not flower and fruit as heavy the next year. That's a lot of our fruit trees will do that. And so they have to be thinned so that you get a consistent fruit every year. Otherwise you get these alternate years. But also we see the fruit late summer, fall, and winter. We don't think about what's going on in the spring. And in the spring is when these are flowering. So if this plant were really flowering and we were to have a pretty rainy period during the time that it's flowering, we don't have all those pollinators going out and moving pollen from the males to the females. And so we forgot about that by the time it's supposed to be fruiting, but you often get that kind of that interaction. Now, if you were to go out and look those often pretty insignificant flowers on your hollies and see when they were blooming and what the weather was doing, you might know whether you're going to get good fruit or not. But you really often lose track of that. So don't give up on a plant just because it hasn't fruited in a couple years. Look around for other male plants that maybe you could add, but also think about planting a whole diversity of these things.
While we're in the vein of Ilex, Marilyn's asking, do Ilex flower on old wood or new wood? And when is the best time to prune if you want to maximize the berries? So that's a great question. Ilex, and let me pull a couple of pieces up. Here's one I didn't show you before. This is one that's starting to turn red. Here's that vomitoria. And you can kind of see there are fruiting on old wood. You've got the new growth on this one coming out here, and it's on old wood. So here's the rub. It's gonna flower on this new wood. It's gonna fruit on old wood. So when do you prune?
Good question. Next question. What you're best doing with your hollies is, if you need to trim them either a little bit, don't trim a whole lot in the winter, late fall into winter, because they'll flower winter into spring depending on the type. And they are a great pollinator plant for winter. They really, we have bees all over our hollies during winter when there aren't a lot of other things in flower. And you don't think of them as flowering plants, but boy, the pollinators love them. So you do it lightly, or you let it get big and then you really cut it back hard. Hollies are one of the few plants that a common recommendation for a large one, like the ones behind me, are what they call hat racket or coat racket, where you can take a American holly with a trunk a foot around. You can cut it off, lop it off at 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, cut every single branch back, and it will, in 18 months, 24 months, it will be a solid tree again. It'll look funky for a little while, but it will come back. And often, if you've got good branching all the way down, you can cut it off, and then if you cut the branches, instead of cutting all the branches off, kind of cut them gradually wider if you want that nice pyramid again. So if you want to rejuvenate one, that's how you do it. Now, you won't get fruit for a couple of years. You can do that, and then after that, do just a little bit of pruning. I like to do my pruning on the evergreen ones just before new growth is going to start. And that's really because if you want to like shear it, rather than snipping each individual branch, if you shear it, you'll cut a lot of leaves in half and things like that, and it'll get kind of brown looking. So if you do it just before new growth starts, boom, it flushes out right after that and takes care of it. But I do tend to do hard pruning on them and no pruning as kind of my pruning. All right. Now for something I don't know if it's completely different. This is one of the great underutilized landscape plants that we have. This is one of our natives. This is Calicarpa americana, our native beautyberry. And you can see why it is called beautyberry. It is these bright purple fruits, almost metallic blue. I remember the first time I saw one in fruit. We had started working at a nursery in college, and oh my gosh, it blew me away when I saw this thing. I had no idea anything was like this. And everywhere that you see these little bunches of fruits, there would be leaves during the growing season. They've got attractive flowers. They're small. You have to get up close, but they're little lavender flowers. And then it's covered with these fruits. And the birds love them. They will just strip them bare once they get going on them. Now, there are other forms of our native beautyberry. This one still has its leaves a little bit on there, although you can see our cold weather has done it a little bit in. This is one called Welch's Pink, not for the jam. It was found by a gentleman named Bill Welch. Actually, he found it on 9/11. That day he found it and then was sitting eating lunch and saw the news about 9/11. Probably we could have gotten a better name on it than Welch's Pink. Then could have been a better thing. There are naturally occurring white fruited forms of beautyberry. They tend to, as soon as there's a frost, they tend to kind of brown up a bit. So they're not quite as showy in my mind. This looks like it should be is a cross between the two, but it's not. It's a naturally occurring pink form. From Texas, and when you grow the seed out, they come up almost 100% true. You occasionally get a few purple ones, I'm told. I've never seen that, but you'll get varying shades of pink, lighter pink to darker pink. And I have noticed that when the birds go through, they eat the purple one first, they eat this pink one second, and they eat the white one third of our natives. Then they move on to one of the Asian beautyberries. before they eat anything. Before this is their second choice for sure. But they will strip them. They like them. Many of the Asian beauty berries have much smaller fruits, and that may be part of it. But they'll go through their purple, pink, white native ones, and then the purple and white, and then white Asian ones. There's a Mexican one that they don't touch. They just won't eat it at all. So these are 3 different species or hybrids. Let's see if I can remember which one's which. This is a hybrid called Purple Pearls. I have its sister, Purple Glam, growing in my yard, and everybody asks about it. They've been asking about it for about the past month, and they'll continue for another month because it's so incredible. It's a hybrid with a species called Calicarpa quangtungensis, the quangtung beauty berry, which has this narrow leaf, and I don't know if you can really see, but it has almost purple hairs on it, which is pretty evident in the species. So it's a very distinct plant, and I say that because all the Calicarpa quangtungensis and its hybrids tend to be very upright and not as broad and bushy as some of the others. So I like those just because they take up less space in my garden. I can put more things in there because they go up. Some beauty berries can get quite large. This is one called Calicarpa oceamensis, another Asian Calicarpa. It's a big honking shrub, 12 feet by 12 feet. But the beautiful thing with Calicarpa is they do flower and fruit on new wood, and you can cut them back to the ground every single year and let them flush back out. This is a Calicarpa japonica, which is often confused in the trade with Calicarpa dichotoma. Calicarpa dichotoma is a smaller plant. Calicarpa japonica, a larger one. But you can see they all have these similar fruit on there. I forgot to mention one of my favorite things to tell people about our native beauty berry, not the Asian ones, is the leaves. If you grow these and you rub the leaves and rub it on you, it is a fantastic mosquito repellent. Great mosquito repellent. And it's not sticky and gross and doesn't smell. And I take it and I'll put it on my head. I have planted beautyberry, not just because I really like it, but really I have planted it, a bunch of the American ones throughout my garden so that I have it near at hand whenever I'm working outside and I can grab some leaves and rub them on if the mosquitoes are out there. It is that is the only reason I planted so much of it in my garden, because I don't plant a lot of anything. So that's because it's a great repellent. All right. Kind of the next group I want to talk about are dogwoods. Dogwoods are great plants for birds. Our native flowering dogwood, Cornus florida, produces fruit. Those are some of the very best fruits for birds in terms of the whatever they have in them, the nutrients in them. However, I find I don't get much fruit on dogwoods much anymore. Every once in a while I'll get good fruiting somewhere where there's dogwoods around and there's good air circulation and good movement. I'll get fruit, but I just don't get a ton of fruit for the most part. If you do, great. If you want to plant a bunch and hope you get it, great. But I think mostly a lot of the dogwoods I see growing, whether myself or other people around here, are just so stressed, being planted in clay soils and not being very happy here, that they just don't fruit well. But we have shrubby dogwoods that do fruit well for us. We have native ones, and then there are also European ones. And so when you hear people talk about the red twig and the colorful twig dogwoods, they're usually talking about some of the European ones, but we also have these shrubby dogwoods, and they're great for birds. These have gotten a little bit hard and before the birds got to them. It's kind of in a real kind of hidden spot in the garden. But in general, you'll have these shrubs, they'll have either black or white fruit on them, and the birds love them. They're very good for the birds. You get the great colorful stems. This is one called Winter Fire. It's getting great fall color, and then it'll get beautiful orange and yellow and red stems on it. And those are all great, and those are very easy to grow for the most part. They like moisture. They'll take dry soils, but if you really want them to fruit the best, if you put them in a wet spot in the garden, that's where they want to be. We do have another dogwood tree species, native, that is nobody grows, and it can often get canker, but it's one of my absolute favorite plants. We call it the pagoda dogwood, Cornus alternifolia. And it has the little flat clusters of white flowers like the shrubby dogwoods, not the big 4 bract petaled ones like our flowering dogwood. And then it gets big blue fruit on a corymb on top. And it's really showy, but the fruits are not showy for long because the birds come through and just strip them immediately. I think it must be one of the birds' favorite fruits. I also often talk about, native, non-native, good, bad, and with the hollies, native, non-native, it's all good. The dogwoods, the Coosa dogwoods that have the big, kind of almost ping pong ball size fruit or a little smaller, those are not great for birds. They just really don't eat those. They'll peck at them a little bit, but they're not stripping your tree of those generally. So this is a case where definitely our native flowering dogwood is better than the Asian flowering dogwood. The shrubby European American ones are pretty much the same. All right, getting into some other plants. Viburnums. Viburnums are just fantastic for fruits, for birds. We've got things like our native arrowwood, Viburnum dentatum, dilatatum. I always get the two confused because they look identical. Maybe they've put them together now. We have several native dogwoods that all look pretty similar. If you're not an expert, you can tell people whichever of the 3 or 4 they are, and people believe you. We've also got the great, one of the best fruiting ones that I know of our natives, in my experience in gardens, is our maple leaf viburnum, Viburnum acerifolium, which has, instead of having this real regular outline, has some lobes in there like a maple leaf. And it's like many of these, it'll go from red to kind of black. The other great native, our plants here didn't have any fruit on them this year for some reason, but the Viburnum nudum, or smooth withrod, it's sometimes called, and different forms have different hardiness, have different, some are very good evergreen, some of the southern forms, some are very deciduous. But what I love about those is the fruits start white, go pale pink, and then pale blue, and then dark blue-black. Amazing stuff. Others stay red. This red one is called the tea viburnum. I'm assuming they make tea with it in Asia, but Viburnum satigerum, with these great red fruits on there that birds love, but I never see this moving around in the garden. And there's some with small fruits, and then some with pretty large fruits. These dried out, and I'm not sure if that's because we had some really dry weather or what that is, but they generally will stay red for a bit longer. There's not a lot of flesh on these. And this is another Asian one, but I wanted to point this out. When somebody says, like me, says viburnums are good, it doesn't necessarily mean all viburnums are good. These, whereas this Viburnum satigerum and the dilatatum have a lot of flesh to them and stuff to eat in there, this is basically just skin over a over a seed. There isn't much for a bird to really get munching on there. So not all plants are created equal, even in the same group, like the hollies I mentioned. I mean, the dogwoods. All right, on to a few other odds and ends. Oh, that was another holly that I skipped. We'll get rid of that. Cotoneaster. Now, people in the South don't grow cotoneaster because the only ones in the shade are little things like Strebes findling and horizontalis and these little flat ground covering things that hate our heat and humidity. If you can grow them, they fruit well and are nice. They have white flowers. They're really showy. But there are hundreds of cotoneaster that nobody knows about, that nobody grows. Ones that grow as trees and big shrubs. This is one called Cotoneaster franchetiae. We have not had issues with fire blight on it, which is what kills a lot of cotoneaster. It's mostly evergreen with these almost blue-green leaves, and then the backside of the leaves are real silvery. I think it's just spectacular. I especially like it grown and pruned up to a single or multi-stem plant, so you can really almost get under it to see that. If you don't, it'll be a 12 by 12 foot big mound, beautiful big mound with white flowers that the pollinators love, and then these fruits which will ultimately turn bright red. And you can think of a cotoneaster as a little apple. It's in the rose family like apples are, and if you break it open, it's got like apple flesh to it. It's got seeds like an apple. So it's not technically a berry, it's a pome, but we won't go that deep into our botany. But there are a bunch of these, and we don't know which ones are going to be heat and humidity tolerant, be fire blight tolerant. And there are not many species available. So when we can get these, we grow them and plant them out and see how they'll do, because the ones that will grow are really beautiful plants and great for birds and pollinators. When they're flowering, just like other plants in the rose family, many plants in the rose family, the pollinators love them. So we're going to stay in the rose family. And this is another one which sometimes gets a bad name in the South. This is a pyracantha, fire thorn. And it does have thorns. This is one called, the cultivar name is like Cauda.
Cadange.
I can't remember what it's sold as.
Sapphire orange.
Sapphire orange or something like that. Yeah. It's odd spelling. And we have the orange and we have red, and maybe a yellow one. There's a yellow, a red, an orange, and they're big shrubs. And a lot of pyracantha are much like the cotoneasters, get fire blight for us and can be kind of a pain. But these have been really, really good plants for us, and heavy fruiters every year. They're often espaliered for some reason, often espaliered on fast food restaurants. I do not know why. But they can be very cool plants. And I said I don't like these spiny plants and things, and I really don't. But one nice thing about a shrub with spines in it like this, and that's twiggy like a pyracantha, and has fruit that birds like, birds nest in these things. Cat is not going to get up in this thing and get a bird. It's not. And I know they like nesting in them because I grew up in a house with a big one of these on the corner of our house, and the mockingbirds love to be in there, and mockingbirds will dive bomb you if you're not careful. So if you get too near them when they have a nest and they have young. Again, this is kind of like a little apple, like the cotoneaster, and apple's got kind of that mealy consistency, but birds do love it. They really do. Cedar waxwings, they love this thing. They do want sun. Some of the cotoneasters can take a bit more shade, but the pyracantha wants sun. And in general, most of these plants, the more sun they get, the more they'll like it. So, another plant in the rose family. This is a rose. We sometimes forget that roses have fruit. They have hips because so many of our modern selections have so many petals at the expense of their reproductive parts. They don't make hips or very many hips or good hips, or seed has been bred out of them so that they will continue to flower and continue, but they just don't fruit very well. But if you get some of the species ones, some of the ones that are a little more close to the wild types, this is a hybrid. This is one called Nearly Wild, which is a really good plant, very disease-resistant rose, but it's got, flat rose flowers, not Valentine's Day rose flowers, and it doesn't flower off and on all summer. It flowers once, but it's followed by this. That's a beautiful show across that plant. It's gorgeous. And the birds love it. People eat rose hips. It's a little astringent. Perhaps not entirely right. And this one's riper. Let me try that. Yeah, that's pretty good. Kind of gross texture. It's goo. But hey, I've had worse. On these midweek programs, I've had worse. But birds do eat these. Some of the larger birds will get to them, and it's after they've really gotten soft, and they'll get in there and munch on those. And so I love the species roses for the rose hips. And I do wish we grew, as a society, more of these types of roses than the roses that don't produce hips, that don't produce really flower, much pollen for, pollinators and bees to eat, not much nectar, and that get every disease under the sun, so you got to spray them on top of that. If we grew some of the more wild types, they're much more resistant to pests, and they don't, they give them food at multiple times a year from multiple different critters. So I wanted to end with this one. This is a native plant, sometimes called magic berry or coral berry, Symphoricarpus orbiculatus. It's a suckering, spreading shrub, stays fairly low, a few feet tall, but will spread to form big thickets if you let it. Arching branches, gets covered in fruit. There are selections that have white fruit and pink fruit and fuchsia fruit and all kinds of colors. Really beautiful. And I read on lists that birds eat this fruit. However, everywhere I have seen it in a garden, like this garden, where we have tons of birds who eat tons of fruit, this thing has fruit in it. Next year, when it starts, I could probably, if I had looked, I probably could have gone back and found old growth with fruit on it. So I don't know if our birds just have plenty enough other things that they eat so that they don't want this, or if our birds have just gotten picky, or what. Or people look at this and say, it's a native plant, it's got fruit on it, it must be good for birds. I don't know. I will be happy to hear if somebody online tells me that I'm an idiot and the birds love this thing, but I just never see them eating it at all. So, happy to take questions now.
For sure. Okay, we had one before the session started from Carol. She asked, should I leave my lantana berries for the birds?
I don't know if the birds eat, well, let me take that back. I am pretty sure birds must eat lantana, because in areas where lantana is can be an issue, thinking Florida, getting down south where they don't get quite the cold we get, lantana is moved around quite a bit. So birds must eat it. So that's one where I'd say birds will eat it. Probably. Not going to be a problem if they spread it around here. It just, seedlings, it just gets too cold for them to really spread now. And they're probably, if they're having them here, they're probably not moving them all the way down to Florida because they're making several pit stops along the way before they get that seed down there. So if you were in Florida, I'd say probably don't grow lantana, but if you do, cut the fruit off. Up here, I think it's fine.
Awesome. Okay. Irene's asking, so besides the presence or absence of fruit, how can you tell male and female hollies apart?
When they flower, you go in and you look at some of those flowers. And if it is a male, you'll see multiple stamens, little, almost like tiny little short threads in the flower. If it's female, you'll see it's kind of more bulbous at the base and then goes right up into a single stigma. There's a few that have 3 stigmas, but they're thicker than the males. And if you go look at a population of hollies in the wild, you can often find plants that have both male and female flowers on there, on a plant. It's not completely cut and dry.
For sure. Marilyn's asking, I wonder if Ilex vomitoria would be any less or more attractive to deer than Ilex opaca, perhaps due to the caffeine in the leaves. She says, all my Ilex opaca are limbed up by deer to 4 or 5 feet. Do you have anything comment on that?
I don't want to say anything for certain. I feel like vomitoria is, Yaupon is more deer resistant. I haven't seen as many problems with it, but I'm not certain of that. I was working with another researcher on a big holly evaluation at one point, and we took it out before I could really do it, but I had gotten to look at it thinking, we should look at this for deer browse, because we were looking at growth rates and things like that, but we weren't getting very good data because some plants were growing and some plants were getting eaten back to nothing.
Well, no kidding. You've got your deer browsing data built into that data.
Exactly.
Do a meta-analysis and find out what's what. Okie dokie. So Marilyn's asking, is cotoneaster susceptible to cedar apple rust since it's in the apple family like serviceberry is?
That is a great question. I don't know if it's susceptible to cedar apple rust. You know, they're both in the rose family, and there's a lot of things in the rose family, and most of them are not susceptible to cedar apple rust. I would tend to think that if things in the rose family were going to be one of the hosts for cedar apple rust, cotoneaster and pyracantha would be likely candidates, because they fruit with like serviceberry with a pome like an apple does, rather than a berry. But I don't know that I know that information for sure.
Okie dokie. Paul's asking, is there any chance that cotoneaster shows up in a future plant sale or October free-for-all?
Yeah. We've offered it before. I really like it, especially that Franchittii. We actually have seedlings of some other species that I've never grown before back in the nursery that are starting to pop up. So I'm hoping we'll have some other species that we're going to evaluate here, but you know, the extras usually wind up being distributed. We only like to compost the stuff that we rip out of the garden. We don't like to compost it from the nursery side. Hey, if we grew it, somebody ought to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and I'll put this cotoneaster Franchittii on our propagation list. It's
nice.
Pretty easy to root.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. Okay, we got some questions about specific plants and whether or not birds will like them. So Sharon's asking about native cherries. She's asking about hawthorns and mountain ash. And someone else is asking black gum, Nyssa sylvatica.
Okay, so the first one, that was
Native cherries.
Native cherries,
Serotina, I guess.
the Prunus serotina and Prunus patus, and those, yeah, birds love them.
Hawthorn.
Hawthorn, yeah, birds love them, and that's another one of those thorny, twiggy plants that are great for nesting birds. And mountain ash, if you can grow it, yeah, I mean we can't grow it here without it getting fire blight and dying pretty quickly.
Sure.
But yeah, if you can grow it, they like all those.
And Nyssa.
And Nyssa, that's a great one. A great question. I would think birds eat black gum.
Sure.
But I so rarely see it in fruit. It's very cool when I do see it in fruit, but I just don't.
No kidding.
I don't see it often in fruit, and maybe that's because everybody's growing wildfire, and we're not getting some different genetics, and so there isn't as good cross pollination, that kind of thing. But
it's always a possibility.
There's a plant that I did not mention that I did want to mention as one of the really great bird plants. One of the natives that's a really, really great bird plant, and I didn't see fruit on any of ours, and that is our native red cedar, Juniperus virginiana, that you see growing, all in the medians along the highway and things like that, the real pyramidal conifers there. They are mostly dioecious, male, female, not entirely, but there are some that are really good fruiting forms, and birds love those. Those are really good.
Okay, and the next one isn't a question so much as an exclamation. What about Nandina bushes?
I'm glad somebody asked about this because I decided I was not going to bring this up preemptively. Okay, for those of you who don't know, there is information floating around about Nandinas killing all of our cedar waxwings. Here's the truth about that. There was one, maybe two, but I think the second incident is really the first incident that's gotten retold when I go back and try and look at news reports. Decatur, Georgia. About, I want to say a dozen, but maybe 30 cedar waxwings were found dead. And when they were autopsied to see why there was, several of these that were found just dead with no other obvious signs of a problem, they were found to have their stomachs full of Nandina berries. So very quickly, people said, Nandinas kill birds. That is not entirely true. Here's the thing. The birds were all cedar waxwings. The way cedar waxwings eat, they're gorge feeders, meaning they'll get on a plant and they will eat every fruit on there, a whole group of them, and they'll go from plant to plant to plant and just strip them bare. They hate Nandinas. They will not eat Nandina. When I used to work in a nursery, I used to sell Nandinas, and I'd say one of the selling points was you'll have fruit there at Christmas time. If you want to use it for decorations, you'll have fruit there all the way through to the next season. Birds don't eat them. So what's the deal? They died in Decatur, and I'm saying birds don't eat them. Well, I read about, 10, 20 articles about this bird kill in Decatur. And some of them don't mention this at all, but the ones that do, if you read all the way to what is generally the last paragraph, there is somebody, a city horticulturist or forester, who says, in this area, I'd estimate that up to 60 or 70% of the shrubs are Nandina. So rather than planting a diversity of things like hollies and beautyberries and other things, Nandina is what's planted there. And I lived in Georgia, and I can tell you they love their Nandina. So those cedar waxwings come through. there are no hollies for them to gorge on. There are none of these other plants for them to gorge on. There's Nandina. And so they eat it. I'll eat stuff I don't like if I'm hungry enough. And when they eat it, they gorge on it because that's their habit. So even if they don't like it, they will gorge on it. To me, the lesson is not that Nandina is bad. And I'm going to follow that statement up in a second. To me, it is not, the problem is not Nandina, the problem is lack of diversity. If other plants were there, the birds wouldn't eat them. The birds do not eat Nandina here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum because we have other things fruiting. Now, I'm going to flip this on its head a little bit. Birds will sometimes eat Nandina. And we know that because there are some areas in the country, like take what's the name of the national park?
Yellowstone?
No, down in Florida at the Panhandle.
Everglades.
No, at the Panhandle. Starts with A. I grew up going there, and now I can't think of the name. All right, well, it's going to kill me. It's the name of a river. But Nandina is popping up there. And that is because some birds are eating it and moving it around. So Nandina is not a problem around here. The birds don't eat it here at the Arboretum. We will get seedlings around the plants, but it's not exiting the grounds because birds aren't eating it. But if you're somewhere where that's all there is to eat, they will move it. And it is invasive in some areas. Not here, but in some areas. So you want to be careful about that.
We got a couple people with
Apalachicola.
There it is.
Forest.
Maryland gets it. Apalachicola was her guess.
Literally, that was the closest town, Apalachicola, the town of Apalachicola, was the closest town to where I grew up going every summer to my grandparents. It was 35 minutes away.
Oh.
So it was either Apalachicola or Port St. Joe, right in between there. So
Cool. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions, but Marilyn did have a comment that I think is worth sharing. She says, I love when my male Ilex opaca flower because I love the fragrance. So they do have a nice fragrance and they attract a heck of a lot of pollinators.
Oh my gosh.
So it's really a superstar plant for sure. So, but that is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much, Mark, for pulling together this presentation. It is always wonderful to see this diversity of plants and all the good they can bring to the world.
I love them.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful. Hey, win-win.
Honestly. And thank you everybody for joining us today. We will be back next week with the midweek program on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. We will be sitting down with our curator, Dennis, who's going to tell us of the importance of why we at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum gather seed. So that will be incredibly informative and very interesting. So I hope you will join us for that. We will see you all then. Y'all take care.